Welcome to this NEJAC conversation on cumulative impacts protecting people, not just permits. My name is Aya,
And my name is Jimena.
and we were council members of the now disbanded NEJAC, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and now am part of a project called NEJAC Media. Our goal is to bring the NEJAC recommendations back into the public eye. The NEJAC was a federal advisory council formed in 1993 under the EPA to advise on all things environmental justice, and we did it for over 30 years. You can find a link to the NEJAC recommendations in the descriptions of this video. Today, we're talking about one of the most important shifts in environmental justice and public health, how we measure and respond to the whole picture of what communities experience. For too long, policy has treated pollution sources and social stressors as separate, as if a smokestack, a freeway, and a lack of healthcare all exist in isolation. But communities live at the intersection of all those realities. Cumulative impact assessment recognizes that intersection, that health and justice depend on understanding how multiple burdens combine over time to harm or heal. Let's define a few key terms before we dive in. Cumulative impact assessment is an approach that looks at the combined effects of multiple environmental health and social stressors to understand their total impact on people's well-beings.
Burdens are the measurable harms communities experience, from toxic air or unsafe water to underinvestment in schools and housing.
Stressors are factors that intensify harm, such as poverty, systemic racism, climate disasters, or chronic illness.
A frontline community points to people living closest to the harm, often low income, indigenous, or communities of color facing earliest and worst effects of pollution and climate change.
In 2024, the NEJAC, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, released their landmark report on cumulative impacts after nearly 2 years of consultation with communities, scientists, and agencies. These recommendations, summarized in fact sheets by the Union of Concerned Scientists, call for a fundamental shift in how the EPA and government measure risk and accountability. Previously, we had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Christy Erlickson of the Union Concerned Scientists. Today, we're also joined by fellow NEJAC Council member Dr. Sandra Whitehead, a longtime community advocate and professor from George Washington in Washington, D.C. And as an expert on health impact assessments, Dr. Sandra was the other co-chair of the Cumulative Impacts Work Group at the NEJAC.
You worked on the health impact assessments, or HIA, for many years. So how did that background shape your leadership on NEJAC's cumulative impacts work, and what has changed since NEJAC first took this up 20 years ago?
So thank you very much for having me today. Yeah. One of the first things we did as the co-chairs, Christy and I sat with Charles Lee and we debriefed him on this first NEJAC report on cumulative impacts. What did we feel we needed to carry forward into our recommendations, because literally nothing had been done, right? The NEJAC had recommended, I think it was almost 20 things, and there were two that there were like small progress. So some of those things were integrated into this work because we wanted to continue to bring them forward. And we wanted to update the language around community involvement. The original report talked about engaging communities, and we're like, no, 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 we don't want to just engage them. That's like the first thing you do, right? This is, we want to bring them through the process and involve them in the decision making at every step of the process. And my experience with HIA was really useful because the way that we think about cumulative impacts really lines up with the way that we measure health impacts, primarily of policies, plans, and projects, right? And so whenever we were framing out, well, what would it look like if we told someone to go and do a cumulative impact assessment? How would we go about that? Because that's really what we were telling the EPA. So we used the HIA, very well-established 6-phase process, as sort of the basis for the way that we were thinking about CIA. And the difference is, I like to think of it as HIA with history, right? Because in HIA, the first thing you do is you assess what's going on with the community. And traditionally, that involves all the social determinants of health, where people live, where they work, what's their economic status, what is their involvement in the community, what are their health status. You look at all of those things, their educational attainment. And then you look at what are the conditions in the physical environment. Can people bike and walk easily? Do they have access to green space or healthy foods or health care or clean water to drink? And so you integrate those into your baseline assessment in HIA of here's a snapshot of what the community looks like now. In CIA, the first thing you do is you say, I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at all the governmental processes that have been done to and with this community and the results of those, whether that's comprehensive planning, whether that's there's been a health investigation from the health department, whether some federal agency has come in and done some investigation or involvement work, and summarize all of that so that you're not asking the community to relive their trauma every time you go see them. And then you take that to them and you sit with them in small groups, not in some giant meeting. And you say, are these the issues, right? Are these the things that are important to you? Are these the things that we should be looking at in relationship to this issue or this decision we're examining? Right. And so you're going deeper with CIA than you even have time with for HIA. And you're really finding out, like embedding your ideas and your assessment in the community, and their voice is what drives it, not some regulation, not some random process, but the community, because they're there from the beginning and they're shaping what the process looks like.
Thank you. Just to go back a little bit to specifically the Cumulative Impacts Work Group. So it was originally convened in 2004. Do you feel like the 2024 recommendations build on those early foundations, or do you think we're still fighting to be heard on the same points?
I feel like we build on those in some areas, but there are things like the community involvement section or the including, I forgot the terminology that they used it, but they were talking about community disparities, right? Like this disparate health impacts and making sure that we're looking at how it exists before we start our analysis. And that's something that we just seem to have to repeat over and over to get a real picture of what the community's vulnerability is before you do other things. So, is there already two other point source pollutions in this sources in this community, right? Are people already suffering from underlying health conditions from other environmental or economic stressors? So I think that we were able to build on some of those and even incorporate and bring forward a few of them and say, these things were in the first report and we're still talking about them. Why is that? Um, but I also think we're able to expand a lot on those ideas and to be more specific in our recommendations than they were able to be, just because the science has moved in the last 20 years. And we were very lucky at the point in time where we came into the picture. The EPA was taking a multi-pronged approach to cumulative impact assessment. Our charge was one piece of that. And there was also a charge to the local government advisory council and also to the Children's Environmental Health Advisory Board and the Scientific Advisory Board. So they were gathering input from all of their relevant federal advisory commissions, but they were also on the other side, they were creating a cumulative impacts indicators project that was supposed to be a dashboard. They have these 3 modules that were intended to train internal EPA staff on what are cumulative impacts and how do you do a CIA. And they also had this cumulative impacts framework, which was just finished in February of this year. None of those products outside of the framework have been made public, but I personally worked on them through a contractor at EPA, and I think that as things that were created with federal money, they should be adapted and they should be out there in the world.
Thank you. I didn't know a lot of the background there. Thank you for sharing that. So we're gonna move on to defining cumulative impacts in practice. So the first recommendation in the 2024 report reads, EPA should use cumulative impact assessments to reduce disproportionate exposures and impacts to overburdened communities. Can you explain what a cumulative impact really means, not just in theory, but in the lived experience of communities?
So I can give you an example of a community that I'm working with. They have 2 Superfund sites in their communities. They have 6 brownfield sites in their communities, and their harbor is a Superfund site. And there are PCBs that have not been dug out of their harbor. So every time the water, the waves come in, PCBs are being aerosolized into their community and blowing on shore, right? And so they're dealing with that. They are primarily, their community is primarily of Cape Verdean descent. They have some new Americans who've moved into their community. So they're a community of color, 99%. Some of their residents do not speak English. They do not have a clinic or a grocery store within 2 miles of their community. And they suffer disproportionately from some of the oddest gallbladder, kidney cancers, and obesity, right? They have all of these combined health outcomes that are in the poor range compared to both the state and the rest of their community in these 2 zip codes. And now they're having gentrification pressure, right? So the cumulative impact, the stress on these community members is huge. That's what we mean when we talk about what cumulative impact feels like when you live in a community. There are a
Mm.
lot of vacant buildings in their community. They have PFAS in their drinking water, and they have a lead problem because most of the houses were built prior to 1932.
Mm. So
So
much
many
to
problems.
Traditionally, I know that we've only been looking at single pollutants at a time. Can you share a quick example that captures the difference between studying a single pollutant and studying the whole picture, like we are discussing today?
A pollutant or a pollution source.
Sure, or the pollution source. Let's go with that.
There's a there's a community in North Florida, and they currently have a paper mill. It's 52 square miles, approximately 15,000 people. So they have a paper mill where most people work there. And so they have they have SOx and NOx, which every paper mill puts out. And they had a proposal to build a biofuel facility, right? They're going to burn
So SOx is sulfur?
sulfur dioxide. I'm sorry.
No, it's
Nitrogen
okay.
dioxide and sulfur dioxide.
Got it. Thank you.
No, I slip into it, so please call me on it.
No worries.
Um, and so there was a proposal to build a biomass facility to generate electricity for the surrounding urban area.
Mm.
They're going to burn switchgrass and create electricity. And so in considering whether the pollution that was going to come out of this new power plant, this little facility, they were they only looked at the state regulator only looked at the pollution that was going to be coming out of that switchgrass facility, right? The biomass facility. They didn't consider what was already in the air from the other facility, and they permitted it. And, people's health deteriorated and they wondered why. It's just like, right? You didn't think about what was already going into the air. You're just thinking about this one thing. And this is how we permit things,
Hmm.
incredibly harmful things, and the density there was lower. But if you think about some place like the Houston shipyard, right? We're going to put another polluting facility there. We don't consider what the air quality is already like. We don't consider how many facilities already exist that are spewing things into the air. We only look at the total load way up here.
This is why this work, cumulative impacts assessment work, is so important.
Because you want
It's
to look at the real vulnerability of people before
mhm,
you do more things to them.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Switching gears to maybe something a little bit more on the positive side,
Less heavy.
yeah, a little bit less heavy. Would you be able to share with us a real world example of where cumulative impacts thinking has led to tangible change? So maybe in cleanup, in permitting reform, or other health outcomes, and how are the results measured? And also, do you think these models can be scaled or replicated?
So in trying to think about an example, the biggest example, and what I think was probably the first cumulative impact assessment actually done using these kind of considerations, was the recycling facility relocation in Chicago, which I think you're both probably familiar with. Using that process really got the community heard, really was able to bring up what the real health concerns are, what the real air quality models would look like. It's one thing what the applicant says, it's another thing to verify that and then talk to the community about it. And I think the city of Chicago did a really great job of engaging communities, and their outcome was really positive for the community, right? But right? What they did was, to your replication question, the city of Chicago took that as their model and they said, what did we do right? What could we have done better? What would make this process stronger? And then they took that recommendation and they did it again in a different community on a different issue. And then they said, we can codify this. And they did, right? They passed a local ordinance that requires cumulative impact assessment. And I think if Chicago can do it, you can do it in other places, right? We already have, I think it's 9 states that have some level of cumulative impact assessment that's required. And there are 6 localities that have these rules, and there are several other states that are looking at incorporating this. It's not going to, I think that this work has the momentum has already built and it's already left the station. People can say, oh, we're not going to call it EJ and we're not going to talk about equity. We're going to do it. And that's how I look at this, right? Like, I don't have to talk about disparities. I don't have to talk about equity. I can talk about helping people live their best lives. I can talk about increasing their quality of life and not ruining it, right? I can talk about with the applicant, right? The person who wants to build a facility, here are the considerations. And I know you as a human don't want to make people's lives worse, right? So let's work with this process and let's see what it really we can, ameliorate some of the harmful effects, and how can we negotiate so that we can accentuate positive effects that might come out of this? Because this is the thing that really drew me to HIA and successively to CIA, is we're not just looking at the harm, right? We're also looking at the benefit. Gentrification has upside, and people don't like to talk about it. But you know what? Whenever my neighborhood started to gentrify, my next door neighbor, who's lived in her house since 1942, said, new folks are moving in. I guess the garbage will get picked up regular now, right? There's benefits to gentrification. It's hard to see, but there are benefits sometimes to some of these other things. And especially if you can sit down with the the permitting authority and the applicant and work through, here are the things the community sees. Here are the things the community needs to be healthier, to not have more harm come to them. And to me, that's the sweet spot of where this belongs.
Moving into EPA's role, and or I will just say other state agencies that have authority, what mechanisms does EPA have under existing law to implement cumulative impacts assessment, and how can it accelerate progress without making new legislation?
They have authority to do a broad range of assessments whenever when the EPA specifically and state agencies are doing feasibility assessments for permitting. There are several spaces in an EIS when those are required, that because EIS says you will look at the environmental impact, and then there's like and health impacts. There's an opportunity right there to assert that authority.
And when are environmental impact statements, EIS is required?
Yes.
They're
Oh,
required
large, very
before
large.
permitting,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to fill that in.
No, thank you. I'm not a lawyer, so I rely on smart
No
people.
worries.
Um, but they also have an opportunity whenever they're giving out money, right? Traditionally, in the last administration, the EGA screen and other types of cumulative impact mapping tools were used to identify communities that were most in need of environmental intervention, and they used that to target funds. But you can also use cumulative impact framework and ideas to go into those grants whenever you're giving them. If you don't want to use them to prioritize where the money goes, you can require your grantees to use the process to make sure that whatever the project is that they're doing doesn't cause harm to communities that are already vulnerable. There are a lot of different ways that it could be done. It could be used in infrastructure permitting whenever EPA gives money to communities to build infrastructure, whether that's water infrastructure or there's so many different kinds of infrastructure they build. So I think there's a lot of opportunity under existing authority if the agency chooses to use it.
That's hopeful in a way.
Yeah, I think it can be done, like the cumulative impacts work was finished. The cumulative impacts indicators project and the training were finished in this administration.
In
They
this
were
current administration or the Biden administration?
they were finished in August, and they're just sitting
Ah,
there waiting for to be used.
got it. August of 2025.
Yeah.
And those have not, you said, have not been published.
They've not been published by the agency, but they have been FOIA'd by UCS.
Interesting.
Yes.
Thank you. In 2024, Dr. Sandra co-authored a paper called Mixed Methods Approaches, Structures and Methodologies for Cumulative Impact Assessment Development. She co-authored it with Dr. Christy Ellickson of the Union of Concerned Scientists and Dr. Benjamin Polly, who was the most recent vice chair of the NEJAC. In the article, the authors advocate combining quantitative environmental risk data with qualitative community narratives and social stressors, and we're probably going to have to dissect what that means. How did this vision take shape, Dr. Sandra? What does it mean for policy and public health, and how are communities leading the way?
This paper was really a furtherance of our work from the NEJAC work group. As we were going through and writing, and you did a lot of this writing as well. But the three of us were kind of the core writing team for the recommendations. And we kept having these conversations about, this is great, we're setting a framework with these NEJAC recommendations, but how people kept asking us, well, how do we use this? This is great. This is pie in the sky. So we set out to put some parameters around the kinds of data that should be used in cumulative impact assessment. And we didn't talk about weighting, but what we had seen in our research and in talking to experts, especially from the EPA and from communities, was that there didn't seem to be a good marriage of using quantitative and qualitative data. You would, the science, what we heard from communities was the scientists come to our communities and they talk about daily average quality life years. And
Is that what qualitative data means? What does
no,
qual
this is quantitative data, right?
Okay,
It's
can
sort
you
of
break that
helping you.
down? What
So
those two things are?
yeah, so quantitative data are things that we can objectively measure. Things like parts per million in the air, right? Parts per million of pollution in the air, or the the T, TMDL, right? The amount of particulate matter suspended in our drinking water. These are things that we could objectively measure. Things like how many people died of cancer in this community. So most of the time, whenever folks are doing risk assessment, professionals are doing risk assessment, these are the data that they tend to be comfortable with, that they tend to know where to find, right? And whenever they go to talk to communities, this is what they present to them. Qualitative data is a little different. It has more to do with how community members feel, right? What is their perception of their safety? What is their perception of their risk? What is their memory, right, of the pollution in their community? What are the impacts that they know about because they feel them inside, but no one's ever measured, right? Because no one ever asked them the question. I'm working in this community and they said to me, none of these data that you showed us talk about eye cancer. I was like, eye cancer, that didn't show up anywhere. And they're like, yeah. And they quickly, the elders named like 12 people who died of eye cancer, right? Just in the last 2 years. And I'm like, oh, we need to look at this because no one had ever looked. And I said, well, it doesn't show up on any of these surveys. ATSDR has been here 3 times. And they're like, no one asked us.
Mhm. What's
So,
ATSDR?
oh, the agency for, I'm terrible with these.
It's a government agency
It's
that
a
came in
government
and asked
agency,
these
yes, that
questions.
that
Okay.
looks at assesses toxic risk
Okay.
to communities from toxic waste. I
Okay.
apologize.
Thank you so much for explaining
I
that.
couldn't
It makes
remember
much
that.
more
It's a part
sense.
of the CDC,
Okay.
right?
Got
So
it.
they had been there to look at pollution twice, the CDC, and no one ever asked them about eye cancer.
Mhm. Thank you. It makes more sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I apologize for getting confused.
Oh. So would you say that the HIAs are kind of the baseline data, the quantitative part of the CIA research, the cumulative impacts assessment research that you do as somebody who's looking into the cumulative impacts issues?
Yeah, I would say that the screening and scoping phases of HIA match up really well with the
Mm,
screening and scoping processes of CIA, and then you go deeper, right?
I see.
And then the EPA model only has a 4-step process for CIA. I would contend that you need to do all 6 of the phases of HIA with this cumulative impact lens through each and every phase.
I see. Thank you so much. So the last theme 5 of the NEJAC's report emphasizes EPA should validate lived experience and incorporate it into assessments and processes through co-design and shared leadership, like we've been talking about. What does lived experience mean to you, and how can agencies integrate it alongside quantitative data?
To me, lived experience is whatever communities want to tell me about their experience in living in this place. So oftentimes we will do structured interviews or focus groups and we will have questions, but I have a lot of open-ended questions as well so that I can elicit, well, what's the history with this company and the community? What are your concerns or your thoughts about this project, right? And really getting them to tell us stories so that, we already know the history of what's available in the public record, because I won't call it the objective history because it's not, but it's what's available in the public record is what we go into these conversations with. But we don't know what it's really like. I can give you a timeline of what happened to this community, but I didn't experience it. I don't understand what it was like. I don't understand the children were going to sleep hungry or, crying because they were coughing all night, right? Like those are the kinds of details that you really need to understand how, say a polluting facility has impacted families in this community, or to hear the history of people who passed on from cancer or from, whatever disease was caused by, in the one of the communities I'm working with, they had a tool and die factory in the middle of their community, right? And so the people who worked there became very sick. So there's just all of these experiences that they have that I wouldn't have as a researcher or an assessor, right? I haven't been to this community when it rains, for instance, right? I don't know whether or not it floods. I don't know what problems that causes, but they do. They've lived there forever. They can tell me every season, every seasonal problem, everything that's ever been done there that might not be in the public record, whether or not the factory was altered without permits, all of these things.
Mhm.
These are the things that they know. And we have to take that and we have to integrate that with the things that the public record tells us, that the health statistics tell us. And then we have to integrate that in a way to make it useful to communities and say, well, here's what the statistics say. A, does this seem right to you? And sometimes they go, oh, I never thought about it in that way. And then they tell you a different story and you understand, have a deeper understanding. But you have to keep coming back to communities with the data because just because it looks subjective and it's, quantitative, it's not going to give you everything you need to know to create a useful intervention that's not going to harm people or that's going to do the least harm.
Mhm. So this is how you weigh health data. You incorporate the lived experience of people to really try to figure out what the health data is. It helps tell the story for the data.
Yeah,
And,
it fills in the blanks.
okay. And it sounds like this is part of what you discussed in the paper Mixed Methods,
It is.
how to design assessments so community knowledge isn't just added on, but it defines what gets measured.
Exactly.
And okay, thank you.
Yeah.
What might it look like to measure improvements in lived experience?
And that's something that has not had a lot of research or practical application. In HIA, you're incorporating, it's very structured when you incorporate community voice, when you go to the community and what kind of data you get from them. And to me, right, you need to be doing this as often as possible. You need to be going back to them so that you can have this co-design relationship with them.
Mhm.
Because if you're not building that trust with them as you go, if you're telling them the thing, right? I had a person tell me one time that the CDC showed up in their community and told them everything that was wrong with them, and they felt ashamed. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, no one should leave a public meeting feeling that way,
Yeah,
ever.
that doesn't build trust.
Right, right. And I think my community experience has really led me to a lot of the recommendations that were in this paper that are also evidence-based, that, the more we consult with communities, the better the outcomes are.
Mhm.
And then this monitoring and evaluation piece on the end, this is the piece that we're always terrible at.
Mhm.
By the time you get to monitoring and evaluation, there's no money left in your
Mhm.
budget, right? And you have to rely on the people who live in the community or the local health department or, the local government. You can create a dashboard for them, but they have to update it. They have to, right? They have to measure. And it doesn't always happen unless there's a community group holding them accountable.
Mhm.
And I'm sad to say that that's the state of things. I wish it was better. And I think part of our issue is that we don't allocate enough money or time for these kind of assessments to be sure that we're doing everything we're doing the right way.
Why is an explicitly anti-racist framework essential for cumulative impacts work? What shifts when we name structural racism as part of the problem?
The way that we talk about it and the way that we think about it, right? It's not an accident that most of our polluting facilities and terrible land uses are in Black and brown communities. It's just not an accident. And it's been purposeful. So we have to be purposeful in rooting that out. We have to call it out and we have to say, this is racism, this is what we did, and here's how we fix it. And I think that cumulative impact assessment is a tool that we can use to fix those things. We can show that there's a preponderance of unwanted land uses in this area. We can show that the health impacts are significant to the community and you shouldn't put any more of this kind of thing there, right, to cause further harm. But we have to be explicit about it, and people don't like it. They don't want to talk about it that way. But, yes, there are some white EJ communities, no doubt about it. There are white poor people everywhere, just like there are white people of color who are poor, but it doesn't look the same. It's not as frequent. The density of bad land uses, the density of polluting facilities is out there, and it is in Black and brown communities. And you just can't get away from that. And we're never going to fix it unless we talk about it that way.
Going back to how we could use cumulative impacts and the resources that we have developed outside of EPA, where else do you see opportunity? What roles can philanthropy, state governments, academia, and local public health agencies play? And what barriers still hold us back, legal, institutional, or cultural?
So I think that the big NGOs, the big greens, the big public health NGOs like the National Association of County and City Health Officials, NACCHO, they can take up this cause, they can create training, they can put out fact sheets, they can echo our work, and they have access to all of these public health and planning professionals. They can, as professional associations, they can provide this training to their folks as a tool, right, to promote health, as a tool to promote economic prosperity, as a tool to promote efficiency in government. I think that local government should take this practice up. It doesn't have to be onerous. It doesn't have to take forever and cost $1 million. There are quick and easy ways of doing it, especially whenever you're involving communities from the get-go, creating seats at the table for them on a regular basis. I think that my own professional association, Sophia, the Community of HIAP Professionals, we are standing up a web page now, and we're going to be offering some training, and we're going to tear it out, right? There's awareness training, and that is for people at the top, elected officials. It's an introduction to what is cumulative impact assessment, why is it important? And then there's like a 2 to 4 hour training where people who are professionals or managers come in, and we talk about it in a little bit of a deeper way. We talk about the process, the why, and the how. And then there's like a half a day training for people who think they might want to do this in their organization, where they come and they work on a pretend case study, which already exist. And then there's the deeper training where people bring their own issue in their little team to the training, and they do their CIA in the training. They get it all scoped and screened. They decide, make all of their, decisions, and they have it laid out so that they can start interfacing with their community and getting their input and revising their draft documents, right? So that they have it set up. They know when they'll have it all lined out of, here are my stakeholders, here are the community members I need to get a hold of, here are the organizations that need to be involved, and when we need to talk to each of them.
And you mentioned that UCS has done a FOIA and do you know if it's on their website, or how do people find the FOIA information that the federal government hasn't
I
published?
don't think because they haven't received the information, I don't
I
think it's
see.
on their website yet.
Okay,
But your best bet is Dr. Ellickson. She's the connection.
I see. Got it. Thank you. And what innovations like participatory mapping, sensors, or new data tools excite you most in this field?
I really like the AI tools around helping you to take your community input and categorize it and theme it and right, just kind of sort it. It can take so long to go through thousands of community interactions. I also use it to summarize interviews and small group interviews,
Hmm.
focus groups, and so there's that, right? And then there's some analysis that you can use AI with, and it's most of the back end stuff. So I really um, have been using that a lot. And then the other kind of tools I really like are these analysis tools where you're able to input everything that you found out from the community. Here are your trade-offs, and make a matrix table, right? And use the matrices to do that. I really like the ability to use community participatory tools. So I've done, with the latest community I'm working with, we've done 3 Zoom interactions where they went into rooms and they had virtual boards. And then we did the same sort of data walk in the community in real life. And so people were able to go to both of them. So I'm really excited about the technology that allows us to give feedback faster, better, and cheaper to communities, but also the sensor technology. The community I was telling you about that had all of the PCBs in the air, they were able to get sensors, air sensors in their community from Groundworks USA. And so we have hyper local data on what's in their air, what are the pollutants, what are the times of day whenever it's worse. So we can tell people over air now to stay inside. Right.
Mhm.
So those sorts of innovations and tools make our lives as assessors easier, but they are also a pipeline to give the community the data they need to make their lives better.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, so much advancement in technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, so before we close, I'd love to hear a brief call to action. So, what's one next step you hope the audience takes, whether they're policymakers, health professionals, or just community members?
Engage with each other. Right. We have become so polarized as a society that anytime there's a contentious issue, and usually when there's a contentious issue, it involves health. Anytime there's a contentious issue, don't close off the possibility of talking to each other or exploring the issue together so that you can come to solutions together. I've heard too many people in the last year or two talk about how these people are my enemy or those people are my enemy or how they don't trust the government or this institution or that institution. And that doesn't help us get on with life together. It doesn't help us improve our communities, and it doesn't help anyone's mental health. So I would say engage with each other deeply, especially if you disagree. Talk about problems, come to solutions together. And if you look across all of my work, that's really the theme, right?
Mm.
To get people to talk to each other and solve problems together. Because if we're doing that, it's really hard to hate somebody that you've been sitting next to for 2 years talking about a problem.
Thank you for all you've done to improve the quality of life for communities.
Oh, this is what I love to do. I grew up in a place where, you know, just because you were poor meant you got to die of cancer, right? And it's just, this is what drives me, so that no kid has to grow up in a place like that.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate all the work you do and the conversation that we were able to have today. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Whitehead, and to everyone listening for helping carry this work forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.